I raised my stepdaughter for 22 years. Weeks before her wedding, fully paid for by me, she asked her absent biological father to walk her down the aisle. Hello Reddit I+ here. My name's Ethan McAllister, and I'm 54 years old. I didn't grow up with much. My dad worked in a steel mill, my mom cleaned houses, and I learned early on that nothing in life comes without sweat and stubbornness. I started fixing cars at 14, built up a little repair shop in my 20s, and over the decades turned it into a regional chain. Now I live comfortably, not rich like on TV, but I can pay my bills, take vacations, and help my family when they need it. My wife, Marissa, is 51. We've been together for 23 years, and for the most part, it's been a good marriage. We have one son together, Logan, who's 21, and then there's Sophie, my stepdaughter. She's 26 now. Sophie isn't my blood, but for 2 decades, she's been my daughter in every way that counts. When I met Marissa, Sophie was only 6. Her biological father, Darren, was a ghost. He dipped out before she was born, leaving Marissa to raise her alone. When I stepped into their lives, I didn't just fall for Marissa, I fell for Sophie too. By the time Marissa and I got married, I had no hesitation. I signed the adoption papers with pride, put my name on her birth certificate, and swore I'd always protect her. First day of school, I was there. First heartbreak, I stayed up all night with ice cream and bad movies. College tuition, I paid it in full, and for the most part, Sophie and I were close. Until Darren slithered back into the picture. About 8 years ago, Darren suddenly decided he wanted to be a father. According to him, he'd found Jesus, kicked his drinking habit, and was ready to be the man Sophie always needed. At first, I wanted nothing to do with it, but Sophie was curious. She wanted to meet him. Against my instincts, I told her I'd support her decision. Big mistake. Darren quickly became that fun no-rules dad. He showed up with cheap concert tickets, bought her flashy but impractical gifts, and told stories about his wild youth like they were charming instead of shameful. He never once helped with her bills, never showed up when she actually needed work done on her apartment, and somehow still managed to undermine me at every turn. It hurt, but I told myself, you've been here for her through everything. She knows who her real dad is. I was wrong. The engagement. 2 years ago, Sophie met Daniel, a polite, hard-working guy. He treats her well, and I was happy when they announced their engagement last spring. Marissa and I offered to pay for the entire wedding as our gift, not part of the wedding, not helping with costs, paying for everything. We're talking $95,000 for the venue, dress, catering, flowers, photography, the works. We started putting down non-refundable deposits within weeks. Sophie was ecstatic. She told everyone, my parents are making my dream wedding possible. Notice she said parents, as in me and Marissa. Darren's name never came up, until 3 months ago. Sophie came over for dinner. She was quiet all evening, poking at her chicken like it had personally offended her. Finally, she set down her fork and said, Ethan, I need to talk to you about the wedding. I've decided I want my biological dad to walk me down the aisle, and I want the father-daughter dance with him too. It took me a few seconds to process the words. This was the same man who missed her first words, first steps, first everything. The man who reappeared only when she was an adult and self-sufficient. And now, she wanted him to have my moments? I asked as calmly as I could. And where exactly does that leave me? She wouldn't meet my eyes. You'll still be in the front row. Of course you'll be part of the pictures. But Darren is my real dad, Ethan. I want to honor him. Real dad. I'd been dad for 20 years, through every scraped knee, late-night ER trip, school play, and exam meltdown. But now, days before the wedding, I was being told I'd been, what? A placeholder? Marissa jumped in, reminding Sophie of everything I'd done. The years of sacrifice she never saw. Like the extra hours I worked so she could go to summer camp, or the vacations I skipped so she could study abroad. But Sophie dug in. She accused me of making the wedding about myself and said I was trying to buy her loyalty with money. That one nearly made me lose it. Finally, she dropped the bomb. If you can't accept it, Daniel and I will just elope. This is my day, Ethan. My choice. I sat there in stunned silence, feeling like the floor had dropped out beneath me. When I finally spoke, my voice was cold. If I'm not important enough to be your father on your wedding day, then I'm not funding your wedding. Not a cent. You can have Darren walk you down the aisle, but he can pay for the aisle, the flowers, the food, all of it. She looked at me like I'd slapped her. Marissa backed me up, but I could see it broke her heart. Sophie stormed out, slamming the door so hard a picture fell off the wall. Without my money, their grand plans unraveled fast. The venue wouldn't refund the deposit, but they wanted the rest of the balance, which Sophie and Daniel didn't have. The designer dress she'd ordered went unpaid for. The caterer dropped them. The photographer booked someone else. She went to Darren for help. He offered her $500 and a Maybe I can sell my motorcycle. Daniel's parents refused to step in, saying they don't get involved in drama. By the end of the month, Sophie's dream wedding had been reduced to a courthouse ceremony. I wasn't invited. Logan wasn't either. Marissa went, not to support Sophie's choice, but because she couldn't bring herself to abandon her daughter entirely. She told me later the ceremony lasted all of 10 minutes. No music, no flowers, just Sophie in an off-the-rack white dress, and Darren grinning like he'd won some competition. 6 weeks later, Sophie called me. She sounded small, broken. She said she regretted how she handled things, that she realized Darren had never really been there for her. I told her I loved her, but trust, once shattered, isn't something you can glue back together overnight. The day Marissa came home from that stripped-down ceremony, she didn't say much at first. She put her purse on the counter, poured herself a glass of wine, and sat at the table without looking at me. Finally, she said quietly, "It wasn't a wedding, Ethan. It was paperwork, with rings. No reception, no music. Just Sophie in a plain dress from a department store, Darren wearing a wrinkled suit that looked like it had been borrowed from a thrift shop, and Daniel looking like he'd rather be anywhere else." Marissa said Darren soaked up every second of attention, joking with the clerk, making speeches that weren't asked for, telling everyone how proud he was to give away his daughter. Proud, after vanishing for most of her life. Marissa admitted she cried in the car afterward, not because of the lack of glamour, but because she could see in Sophie's face that the reality didn't match the fantasy she'd built in her head. 2 weeks later, Sophie called me. Her voice was tight, but I could tell she'd been crying. "Ethan, Darren's been asking Daniel and me for money." I nearly laughed, not out of joy, but because I had predicted this exact moment. Darren had promised her he'd step up for the wedding, and now that it was over, he was back to his old habits. He'd told them he needed a small loan to get back on his feet, but when she pressed for details, the story fell apart. Gambling debts, an old DUI fine, some friends he owed. I didn't say I told you so. I wanted to, but I knew she was already feeling the weight of her choices. Daniel, from what I heard, wasn't happy. He had been polite during the whole wedding mess, but privately, he'd told Marissa that he thought Sophie had made a huge mistake by pushing me aside. He'd even told Sophie that he'd have been proud to have me as his father-in-law walking her down the aisle. Now, with Darren constantly hanging around their apartment and hinting at money troubles, Daniel's patience wore thin. Arguments started. Sophie defended Darren, at first. Then she started noticing the late-night calls, the borrowed car that came back with an empty gas tank, the way he conveniently showed up around mealtimes but never brought food. About 2 months after the courthouse ceremony, Sophie called me again. This time her tone was different, softer, hesitant. "Ethan, can we meet, just to talk?" We met at a little cafe halfway between our houses. She looked tired, older somehow, like the wedding had drained her instead of giving her joy. She started apologizing immediately, about the aisle, the dance, the accusations that I'd tried to buy her loyalty. She said Darren had made her feel like she owed him a chance to make up for lost time, and that she thought the wedding was the perfect way to do it. "I see now it wasn't about me," she said, staring into her coffee. "It was about him proving something to you, and I let him use me to do it." I listened. I told her I forgave her, but that forgiveness didn't mean things would go back to the way they were overnight. "Trust," I said, "is like a bridge. Burn it, and you can't just walk back across. You have to rebuild it, piece by piece." A few months later, Darren disappeared, just like before. No calls, no visits. Sophie later found out he'd been arrested in another state on theft charges. She didn't even get a goodbye, just silence. That was the moment she truly broke. She came over to our house one Sunday afternoon, tears streaking her face, and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "You've always been my dad," she whispered, "and I didn't see it until I lost you." I hugged her back, but in my mind I couldn't help thinking, "You didn't lose me, Sophie. You walked away. It's been a year since the wedding that wasn't." Sophie and I are rebuilding, slowly. She comes by more often, helps Marissa in the kitchen, even sits on the back porch with me while I work on old motorcycles. But there's still a part of me that's cautious. Daniel and Sophie are still together, though I can tell the whole ordeal left a mark on their marriage. They don't talk about Darren anymore. Not to me, not to Marissa. It's like they've put him in a box labeled past mistakes and shoved it into a dark corner. As for me, I'm still proud of the years I gave her, but I'm also more guarded now. I learned the hard way that love and loyalty aren't always the same thing, and that even 20 years of fatherhood can be rewritten in someone's mind if the wrong person whispers in their ear long enough.